Hey, it's Alan. Let's do something a little different today. Alien fusions are one of the staples of the Ben 10 community, and the franchise at large. Beginning with the episode Dr. Animo and the Mutant Ray during Season 2 of the original series, Alien Fusions debuted with widespread appeal, eventually spawning its own game where you could buy toys and then collect codes for each different alien and fuse them together to see new artwork designed by Thomas Perkins, the art director for Season 3 and 4 of Ben 10. I've always loved fusions, and there's an infinite amount of creativity on display within the community, and I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring and come up with a few designs that I would have loved to see in the show, and I invite you to come along for the ride. The first fusion I've wanted to see for a long time was a hybrid transformation that combines both Petrosapien and Pyronite DNA. Diamondhead is my favorite alien, but when watching the show for the very first time, Heatblast was actually my favorite. Probably because he was the very first alien we were introduced to, but I love and still love fire and fire-based powers. This fusion was shown within the DNA lab, and while I do love the idea of reskin fusions as described in the Inktank's video Understanding Fusions, which I highly recommend you watch if you haven't already, I do think that there are more options regarding this fusion in particular. So, the very first thing I wanted to incorporate was the idea that the crystalline structure of Diamondhead's physiology is still intact, and instead of it being replaced with the molten rock body of a pyronite, he is instead made up of encased super hot plasma that form a crystalline exterior, keeping the general idea of Diamondhead's crystal body intact in certain areas, while also bringing over the fire elements from Heatblast. In place of the uniform itself, and the head of course, is where the rocks will be situated, kind of mimicking the uniform pattern of Diamondhead by using both dark and pale rocks. The idea is that the darker rocks resemble a type of basalt rock formed near the surface of volcanoes or most of the planet's crust, lava that was rapidly cooled, while the lighter rocks resemble pumice rock, superheated rocks that are ejected from volcanoes with very high water and gas contents. Aside from trying to give it a scientific basis, what really matters more than anything is the design itself, which I just thought, in trying to keep the uniform, it would look really cool to see. The idea of the superheated plasma inside of his crystals comes into play for his abilities as well. When ejected and shot from the body, the crystals don't really have a tether anymore, so to speak, with his body being that tether. Now that they are separated from his body, he can quickly expand the heated plasma inside of the crystals further, causing them to explode like bombs into open flames and hot plasma that coat the surrounding area. I present to you, Diamondblast. The next fusion is one that one of you wanted to see, so thanks for leaving a comment on the Season 2 retrospective and letting me know which fusion would interest you. The idea of a Ghostfreak and Ripjaws fusion excites me because Ghostfreak has always had some incredible and creepy fusions in the DNA lab, and Ripjaws himself is pretty ferocious on his own. For this combination, I opted to make Ghostfreak and Ripjaws' tail blend into one appendage, with ghostly purple fins extending from the tail, reminiscent of Ripjaws' original tail. The upper body is a simple blend between the two, with the tracks that once made up Ghostfreak's body now also representing the gills that Ripjaws had. I did end up going with a bulkier Zescare look, but I'll talk about that more in a bit. Ripjaws' original weakness was not being in water, and while on dry land, he'd really struggle in a fight if he didn't have access to it because he needed it to breathe. Ghostfreak didn't have a weakness, and while I elaborated heavily on the sunlight weakness, what it means and what my opinion on it is when I covered the episode Ghost Freaked Out, for the sake of uniqueness, I did incorporate a weakness to sunlight in this specific fusion in a way that I think is pretty unique. Instead of needing water to breathe, he now lives off the absence of light and quote-unquote breathes darkness. In dark areas, he's able to breathe freely and is very capable, making shadowy areas or deep underwater perfect for him. However, when in sunlight, he begins to suffocate, and instead of burning, his body shrivels up and is weakened considerably. Don't ask me the specifics on how breathing darkness works, it just does. So in the end, due to the light weakness and the body shape, this might be more appropriate as a Zescare and Ripjaws fusion, but a lot of fusions in the DNA lab incorporated Zescare's design anyway, so I feel like there's some freedom of choice there. For the head, I did end up going with Zescare's upside down skull idea, but in the shape of Ripjaws' skull and, of course, giving him a massive jaw. As the finishing touch, I incorporated the lure on the top, the bottom of the head, and had it falling downwards due to gravity, ultimately attaching it to the track marks along his body. I present to you, Ghostjaws. Our next fusion is one that another one of you recommended, so once again, thank you for leaving your suggestion. I really appreciate it, and I hope you like the design. I chose this one specifically because Spitter kind of has a I chose this one specifically because Spitter has kind of a cult following attributed to him, and I think that's pretty cool. Some people really love Spitter, even if he only appears in 2 episodes of the original series and during the intro of Ultimate Alien. He's also the very first new alien we see Ben 10,000 use in the future, along with being the only other alien other than Wildmutt who doesn't speak or have a voice. Even though that's probably due to him not appearing enough, it's still neat to include. For this design, I basically went for a spitterfied Wildmutt. They both have generally the same animalistic body type idea, so it was pretty easy to blend the two designs together. Wildmutt's quills now resemble the spikes at the top of Spitter's head, and are prevalent throughout the design. And the mouth of Spitter has been redesigned to fit the idea of Wildmutt's own mouth structure, like the teeth for example. The eyes along the sides of Spitter had been removed in favor of Wildmutt's blindness, and were instead replaced with Wildmutt's gill-like nostrils that form along the side of his neck. I think the way his powers would most likely function is that with Wildmutt's enhanced senses and tracking abilities, he'd be able to spit out slime or spit with a very specific smell or odor that can be detected at a heightened degree by his senses. If spitting on an enemy, he would then be able to track them and visualize them much more clearly, making up for his lack of visibility in a way that normal Wildmutt doesn't really have access to. Of course, without the spit aiding him, his sense of smell and tracking capabilities are definitely weaker as a result of the fusion, obviously not being as strong as an average Vulpomancer's own senses. But he has the spit to help make up for that, adding both offensive capabilities and a way to reinvent some of that tracking power. Also, as a homage to Wildmutt's color scheme, the fusion spit is now a bright orange. I present to you, Spittmutt. As a bonus, I decided to make a fourth fusion, with some stipulations this time. If you haven't noticed already, I'm pretty much sticking with the classic series aliens, mainly because I just love that era of the show so much, and we're currently on that show for the franchise retrospective. However, as a bonus, I wanted to bring in an alien from later on in the franchise, since we didn't really get too many more fusions after the original series other than in Omniverse, which brought the concept back in a really interesting way. So, for the final fusion, I'm mixing new with old and going with a Swampfire and Accelerate fusion. Swampfire is one of the more iconic aliens out of the Alien Force era of the show, so I thought mixing him with one of the iconic classic aliens is just a recipe for a good time. For the legs, I had the roots form around the spheres that Accelerate would roll on, and since Accelerate and Swampfire both have thin limbs, combining them was pretty easy. I merged the body patterns of Swampfire into Accelerate's black and white uniform, changing up the design for it while still getting to keep that uniform. I opted for this because I don't really want to see a naked Accelerate, and I really like the black and white uniforms. His claws are given a more organic, finger-like shape, with the hands kind of blossoming out of the arm to give it a more plant-like appearance. And the helmet is now encased in the colored petals of Swampfire's head. I made a blend between the two faces since both of their faces have unique details, and combining them in favor of both of them instead of choosing one or the other just felt right, keeping the line shapes of Accelerate while also keeping the outlined eyes of Swampfire and his darker face to coincide with it. For his powers, he's obviously not as fast as Accelerate and not as strong as Swampfire, but there's a happy middle between speed and strength, I think. It makes him an insanely fast, strong, and durable fighter in a way neither of the original aliens were, on top of adding even more powers related to Swampfire's fire and plant abilities. I think due to Accelerate's speed, the regeneration, plant growth, and vine movement from Swampfire is accelerated to an insane degree, so all of that moves just as fast as him. This allows him to use his plants in a lot more interesting and effective ways, like being able to entangle a group of enemies with insane speed. Since his regeneration is sped up, he also has a lot less downtime if any part of him is cut off, making him an extremely durable and overall versatile fusion. Lastly, I added the blooming head details to the end of the tail as well, just to add some more color overall to the design, which I also think just looks really awesome, so that's a plus. I present to you, XLRSwamp. As it stands, I've now made a total of 6 fusions, and I do want to make more in the future. I don't plan on dedicating the channel to artwork or anything, but it does make for some interesting shorter videos once in a while in between the larger retrospective videos and all the other videos that I have in store. Let me know which one of these fusions you like the most down in the comments, and be sure to like the video, it really helps out the channel, and I really appreciate it. If you haven't seen it yet, also be sure to check out my Season 2 retrospective, where I cover the very first episode that started it all and introduced fusions to the franchise. By the way, I posted all of these fusions as I completed them, and also uploaded this video a day in advance, all on Patreon. So if you want access to early content, consider stopping by. Shout out to our high tier patron Bang, and with that, thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.